Welcome back to this lesson on modern Indian history. And in this lesson, we will be talking about tribal revolts. So, we have already done civil rebellions, civil uprisings, and now this tribal revolts, we will talk about certain tribes and certain regions where these revolts happened. And these are equally important as the civil uprisings and civil revolts, as you will find out in due course of time. Now, the first thing that you need to understand is with regards to the nature of these revolts. So, like civil rebellions, they were also spread all over India, and like them, they were scattered and without interconnection. We had pointed this out even in the last lesson on civil rebellions, that this is like the positive thing was that something or the other, some kind of uprising and a realization of injustice during the colonial rule in India was happening in various regions. But where was the disadvantage? The disadvantage lay in the fact that it was so spread out and so sporadic in most regions that it could not last. The second common feature is that it did not have any permanent organization or permanent leadership. Now, if you contrast this, for example, with say the role of the Indian National Congress, the setting up of the Indian National Congress and so on and so forth during the latter half of the colonial rule in India, you will see, or let's say, for example, the Muslim League that was set up, other political parties that were set up, there was some kind of organization and a streamlined leadership that was leading the charge. And that sometimes is required when you have to put forth your demands, when you have to negotiate, as was happening, as we'll find out shortly in the other lessons. When that doesn't happen, then obviously there can be only one winner. There is no room for negotiation. And in those cases, then if your material position is not that strong, say in terms of resources, etc., you will not really be able to sustain that kind of movement, which is what happened in most cases. Now, like the civil rebellions, the issues of, various issues that plagued these people because of which they protested, but in simple terms, the economic issues were the main reason of discontent. Another thing that these revolts showed was, on the one hand, that the tribals had immense courage and they sacrificed a lot. Okay? And brutal suppression on the other hand by the colonial state. In fact, the valor, courage and sacrifice of the tribals was uniformly recognized and documented by the English officials who were involved in crushing the revolt as well. Now, what you need to understand is that the existence of tribals goes back to the beginning of human habitation in India, but till the imposition of British rule, they were not disturbed and no revolts were taking place. So even now, in fact, when you look at a few, movements that are going on, or certain things that tribals are unhappy about, a lot of it has to do with the alleged interference in their way of life and in the way that they, wherever they are staying. So that was happening in the time of the British rule in India and not before, which is why revolt started then. Now, when colonialism based on capitalism started penetrating into tribal areas increasingly, with it began series of revolts which did not stop even in post-colonial India. And, we will give you a background of some of these that have lasted to this day. You could read up on Naxalism as well. That will throw some perspective in this regard. Aside from this, see, what was happening is that from 1813, the colonial state was encouraging the influx of Christian missionaries into tribal areas. Why were they doing this? Because they assumed that if the tribals would be converted to Christianity, it will end their hostility to the English and towards English rule. These missionaries were followed by a large number of non-tribal outside elements as well, such as money lenders, traders, and at many places peasants who cultivated state land, but in the process had established themselves on tribal land. So all these people started coming in and disturbing whatever life. Now, the tribals, they were disturbed by this penetration, and all outsiders began to be seen as common enemies. And the term that came to be used for them was Diku. अब Diku is actually a Santhali term. Santhal tribals के बीच ये इस्तेमाल होता था, and each tribe had its own term. But because the maximum number of revolts and maximum violence, etc., during these revolts was during the Santal movement, hence the term Diku began to be used increasingly. The most important disturbance, we have spoken about the economic reasons, the most important disturbance was that colonialism transformed the relationship of tribals with their forests. How did this happen? Firstly, the colonial state, it reserved the forest lands and placed strong legal restrictions and prohibitions on forest products, forest lands, and the common lands of tribals, including ponds and lakes. They were also prohibited from shifting to new areas. Secondly, there was oppression and extortion by policemen and petty officials. This included even molestation of tribal women. Thirdly, indebted tribals, they were transformed into bonded labor, and those who were not indebted, they were used by the government as forced unpaid laborers. Now, all these factors, they combined to push tribals into spontaneous revolts. So, no one was happy with the state of affairs as it prevailed. Then, like civil rebellions or the popular uprisings that had happened, the tribal revolts were also scattered without any connecting thread. And another characteristic of theirs was that they were purely revivalist in nature, because they sought to restore the disruption that had been caused to the old order. Now, this intensity of the revolt, it varied from region to region, from tribe to tribe, but there was no continuum, and this is what was happening. In some tribal revolts, non-tribal, that is agrarian communities also got involved, either actively or supplying basic necessities because they had a common enemy. So, in as much as this is concerned, yes, these tribal revolts did bring about some semblance of unity in a gradual way. So basically, when you look at the main causes for revolt, it is these. There was extension of colonial administration in the area of tribals, resentment against moneylenders, traders, contractors who were exploiting the tribals, tightening control over forest areas by colonial state for revenue purposes, the reaction against activities of Christian missionaries, recruitment for forced unpaid labor and menial work, and government's efforts to suppress or abolish tribal traditions and rituals. So if you remember, we spoke about this custom of Meria among the Dogariya Kund. And in that, this practice of human sacrifice was thought to be put to an end. But then the problem is that sometimes when you are taking such measures, it does not go down well with the people who practice these rituals, however wrong they may be. And that is what happened in most cases with respect to the last point. It was treated as undue interference in the socio-cultural affairs of the people rather than to be seen as a welfare measure. Okay, now let's quickly talk about the tribal revolt chronology. This is not complete. We start with a few initial ones, and just some things that you need to know about the columns. There's the name, the area, which you do need to know in terms of, which region it was taking place in. Leaders, wherever we had specific leaders or leaders of note, we have mentioned. Otherwise, if you know of any, you can always mention them in the comments. For the year, if you note, there are some which have a range of years written and some just a single year. This in no way means that revolt only took place in that particular year. It very often what has been seen in case of these revolts is that they happened in spurts. And so, for example, if something of note happened between 1820 to 22, then it happened in 1832. तो ऐसा भी होता है, या जैसे 1768 लिखा है तो इसके इर्द गिर्द भी चीजें हुई थी, केवल इसी साल में नहीं हुई थी. So remember this when you read this table. This is an indicative chronology. That would be a better term. So for the Chuar rebellion, it was in Manghum and Barabum, mainly in the Bengal region, and in this year, Bhil, Khandesh, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, 1818. खंडेश अभी कहाँ पे है ये आप देख के कॉमेंट्स में मेंशन कीजिएगा. हो, सिंघभूम, छोटा नागपुर, 1820 to 22 and 1830. होली, सह्याद्री हिल्स, गुजरात, महाराष्ट्र, 1824, 28 and 39. खासी, खासी हिल्स, मेघालय एंड असम. आपको पता होना चाहिए इनफैक्ट मेघालय में वो जो 3 है गारो, खासी, जैंतिया, उनके बारे में. 1829, 1832 और इसमें तीरथ सिंह और बर्मानी ये मेजर थे. कोल, छोटा नागपुर, 1831-32, बुधो भगत. और खोंड में कंधमाल, उड़ीसा, intermittently from 1846 to 1855, and चक्र बिसु. So hopefully this is useful so far. If you have any suggestions, please mention them in the comments. In the following lessons now, we will be looking at Santhal revolt and the Munda revolt and so on. And you do get questions on these, so please be careful while preparing this segment. Thank you.